So tonight you're going to hear from three very distinguished scholars. I'm only going to introduce the first of them so that he can give the proper thanks to the people who made this event possible, and then introduce the other two scholars. Okay, so the first speaker will be my friend Professor Leonard Hammer, who is the inaugural holder of the Edwin and Alma Lakin Endowed Chair in Holocaust, Human Rights, and Comparative Genocide Studies at U of A Judaic Studies and the School of Global Studies. Leonard is a prolific scholar of international humanitarian law. He's a very successful grant writer. He's an award-winning instructor. Sorry, I have to say all these things.
You go, man.
And he's an accomplished builder of academic programs. Among other things, he is the co-founder of the U of A's extremely cost-effective and successful master's program in human rights practice. His latest major publication is a book that he wrote with Marshall Brager, and that work is entitled The Contest and Control of Jerusalem's Holy Sites, a historical guide to legality, status, and ownership. This came out in 2023. So just some housekeeping. I will allow the speakers to give their presentations, and then at the end, we will open this up to Q&A. If you do not have a piece of paper or a note card on which to write a question, I think we'll just have to call people as we move forward. And anyway, please keep your questions or your comments short so we can accommodate as many people as possible. Again, thank you very much for coming. Take it away, Leonard.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Oh, thanks so much, David. Just let me know if I talk, if I move my mouth away from the microphone, I'm not eligible, you can't hear me, just let me know. Yeah, I just wanted to give some thanks, start off by giving some thanks first to the Lakin Chair supporters, who I'm extremely grateful for. It's an incredible opportunity that I have to be able to build out this program, work with incredible colleagues, and work with incredible supporters like the Lakin Chair supporters. I really, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you, and I appreciate you, and I look forward to working with you and to the community too, but certainly with you all, and continuing to do so, and creating interesting programs and fun stuff and innovative things that we could all think about together. Second, of course, is the Pozez family for sponsoring this lecture, the Shaol and Lewis Memorial Lecture. I actually think this is my second one. I gave one many, many years ago when I first came to Arizona on lawfare. So I guess we're morphing into other ground, which is kind of fun to move together. I also want to thank, and you'll forgive me for somewhat of a longish list, but not too long, is, of course, the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. And for me, this is extremely exciting. It's actually, believe it or not, it's our second joint event that we're doing together between the Center for Judaic Studies at UA and the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. And to me, that's invigorating, and that's what it's all about. And that's what we're all about, as you all hopefully know and are aware of. And I really envision, and I thank Lurie, I thank Uri, you guys are great. It's such a pleasure to work with you. I hope we continue to work together, build out programming, build out ideas, and I look forward to that. And I really mean that. We also, there are other departments at UA that helped us put this all together. One is the Africana Studies, which was really exciting to fold into the work that we're doing, and the Honors College, which was an honor. It was really nice to have that involved, and we did some programming yesterday on campus with one of the speakers, with Devin, which was really awesome and really fun. I do have to thank my esteemed panelists for coming. We flew them out here, and I really appreciate it. Professor Devin Randolph, all the way to my extreme left over there, who will be talking, and to Ayal Feinberg, right here on my immediate left. Professor Devin Randolph is from University of South Carolina and Voorhees University, and Professor Ayal Feinberg is from Gratz College over in Philadelphia. And to me, this is great. This is really like an opportunity that you don't just have to listen to me, but you'll also listen to other people, so it'll be hopefully a little bit more diverse, and I believe it'll be interesting either way. And finally, the Judaic Studies staff. I cannot thank enough Jacqueline Schmidt and her able team, Colby, Fernanda, Yali, you all are fantastic. Thank you so much. Great, such a pleasure to work with also. And Jackie hasn't thrown anything at me yet, so I guess I'm in good stead, which is a good sign. My Jews colleagues, my Judaic Studies colleagues, Professor Anat Bailey and Professor Gil Reback, who I love, and I look forward to building this chair out together with, idea-wise, program-wise, and just thinking together. This is extremely important. And last, and certainly not least, my amazing department head, my colleague, my friend, and in many ways my mentor as well, as Professor David Graysbird, who did the intros before. I'm mentioning all these people because this is the inaugural lecture for the Lakin Chair on the Holocaust, Human Rights, and Comparative Genocide. And I'm mentioning all these players because I envision that we all together will create programming, together we'll create ideas, together we'll build something here for Tucson, and also just in general to think about these important topics like the Holocaust, human rights, and comparative genocide, and to be quite frank, including yourselves as well. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. A is the structure of the chair, and B is some initial research that I've engaged and where I envision it going. Let me just switch the slide to the... now, what I did is...
You could stand while you speak for the video.
What's that?
For purposes of the video, could you stand while you speak?
Oh, stand, yeah, sure.
Thanks.
How do you do this? Oh, it doesn't move forward. Oh, well. Oh, there we go. Great. I only have one slide. Because, so this is it. So don't look at it too long, because I don't want you to get too bored. But the truth be told, I have it because it's an outline of what I'm going to be talking about now. I'm going to be jumping around to certain ideas, and I was asked to stand and sit. I might sit for some of the time just to read my notes and such, but I'll go up and down, so hopefully the video people who are watching won't get too dizzy, but we'll see how we can go. I did want to discuss in the introduction the structure of the chair, and I'll explain to you what we're doing. And I'm doing that because I want to eventually hear your ideas. I already had 2 people come up to me and we exchanged emails and we could talk more. The chair is structured as follows. Like I said, I'm extremely fortunate that we have support from individuals, and thankfully the people who initially supported the chair are all consenting to this. And that is, half the funding for the chair is being put aside to be able to have visitors come to campus, either from overseas, internally in America, or other places, that will contribute to the community, offer public lectures, participate in courses that I teach, and hopefully even that my colleagues teach as well, in Judaic Studies and beyond, even in human rights and other programs as well. And allow for that to happen by them coming for, let's say, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, visiting campus. And then every 3 years, we would have a conference where the people who came to visit, the individuals who came to visit, would come back to Tucson, maybe bring their colleagues, and we would have a proper conference, or even informal lectures like these, leading to some form of publication. And I take it every 3 years because I envision that we'll do a kind of a 3-year cycle of themes and ideas that will be linked to the chair itself. So, for example, the first theme that we're taking on, which I imagine will be for the next 2 years, 2.5 years, just given the timing of how the funding comes in and how we can start initiating programming, is actually on Holocaust education, where we're going to be looking at what is Holocaust education, how is it being taught, what's its impact, if at all, hopefully yes, and what's the focus, and what are the mandates by the states, and I plan on looking even beyond, internationally. Let's look at other genocidal contexts, and how do they look at the Holocaust? What can we learn from them as to how they teach the Holocaust, if at all? And other states as well, teaching the Holocaust or not. Why yes, why no? Europe certainly, Africa certainly, different continents, Asia I intend to include as well, to really think about that. So that is the current theme of the chair, which is really, and I'm starting to initiate some research on that. The next theme I imagine will be a more generalized theme, but I'll focus it more as we get closer to it, which is on memorialization. Thinking about museology, what are museums? How do we memorialize? What does it mean? How do we really engage in entrenching notions of the Holocaust? And that actually is partially what I'll be talking about today. because the present talk is kind of what I'll do is outline for you some approaches and ideas of my current research that I'll be doing, touching on topical issues such as genocide as well, but that also reflect in a way my expertise. I'm using that term loosely, of course, but yes, it is a form of expertise or understanding insights that I have in my background, and hopefully reflect new ideas as well. And I think that'll come to the fore as I walk through this lecture. I'm going to be quite frank with you. Not everything is entirely 100% clear that I'm giving you the final ideas. A lot of these are approaches and thoughts, and I'm doing that because I want us all to really think together as we move forward. And you could come up with me and say, hey, this was wrong or this is right. Hopefully everything's right. But hey, think about this, or how can we integrate this idea with regard to whatever it is, memory or what have you. I should also mention is that this talk that I'm giving today will be published as an article called Word and Text. It's a kind of a linguistic article, a journal, a European journal, but peer-reviewed, you know, one of these heavy-duty academic journals. But that's just nice to say because it's always good to have something come out and be published, as we like to say. Okay. With that, let's jump to the first topic, the other one, which is genocide approaches. And that's really thinking about what is genocide. Genocide is an extreme term, even though it's somewhat been overused and arguably misused as well. But there's an extreme impact to the use of the word genocide, what it implies, what it's meant to imply, and importantly, that we don't always think about the implications of using that term. You know, if you play brinksmanship too much, you could be called out and then you lose your standing, you lose your status. And when we use a serious term such as genocide, we should use it very carefully and steadily so that it doesn't lose its weight, it doesn't lose its gravity, because we want to have that prohibition in place for when we really need it. The Genocide Convention from 1950 was a treaty that was adopted obviously after World War II and signed and ratified. I'm not going to go into the whole international implications of what I'm saying, but trust me, it's an entrenched treaty, established treaty that defines what genocide is, and that's under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. It's generally killing of the group, causing serious bodily harm to members of a group, deliberately inflicting upon the group, endangerment of their lives, physical destruction in whole or in part, things like that. That's basically from the Article 2. There's some other elements too, and there's also the most, I believe, one of the most important elements is that these actions which were done against the group, a particular group, were committed with an intent to destroy the group in whole or in part, be it an ethnic group, national, racial, or religious group, okay? So right away we see that we're dealing with something pretty extreme, and that there are certain elements to this crime, the crime of genocide, the prohibition of genocide is perceived as a crime. Hopefully you're not too familiar with the criminal law on a personal level, but basically when you're looking at a crime, you have to have elements to that crime in order to check the boxes and say, yes, you actually did commit that crime. And with regard to genocide, there are what's called objective factors, or objective factor, and subjective factor. The objective factors is called actus reus. I'm not going to throw in too much Latin. Don't get nervous, because I don't know Latin either, but at least I can pretend to. Which is really, actus reus is really an objective notion of that you have an intent to destroy the group. And that's objectively, right? So you really have to look at it, really suss out and figure out, is there an intention here? That's a very high standard. It's a really hard standard to prove, actually. It's not so easy to prove genocide at all. And there's also mens reus, which is a subjective element, and that is, did the group lose its coherence? Did you actually, in your intention to commit genocide, did you do so? All right, so did you actually destroy the group? Or the foundations of the group, such that the group loses its coherence, all right? Now, if we take a step back, and from what I just said, we could think about genocide in a very narrow way or in a very broad way. The narrow way is kind of the approach that has been adopted by the Genocide Convention itself of 1950. And that is, and I'm using the term now obviously very loosely, but you'll see it when we compare it to the broad approach to genocide. But the narrow approach to genocide, and this is what is reflected in the treaty, that's why I read you Article 2, which is a focus on a physical or biological destruction of a particular group. And don't forget, of course, with intent. Right? And that's a definition taken, as you saw from Article 2, in the Convention itself, right? That the Convention defines it in a very physical way that you have to destroy this group. And the reason why the Convention came out that way, and I'll talk about the broad approach, and there were some inroads to making to integrating a broad approach into the Genocide Convention, which didn't pan out entirely, is basically realpolitik. States are careful what they're going to prohibit on themselves because they know they're going to be looked at for that particular action, right? And there's a reality to the world on a certain level where states are driven by their own interests, right? And even thinking about my first words about genocide being an extreme crime, states realized that they were dealing with this extremely severe transgression here, such that if they made it too broad, it would lose its gravity. They wouldn't be able to enforce it. When they made the Genocide Convention, part of the desire of the states was to make sure that this is going to be an extreme action that we can then say to a state, you're committing genocide. There's also, to be quite frank, there was a lot of realities going on at the time with regard to you know, to what extent you post-Holocaust, and then you tell me about, okay, we have to worry about destroying the culture of particular people. We just had close to 10 million people slaughtered, where it's hard to think about a cultural destruction. Let's focus on the physical destruction, which was really extreme. And to be quite frank also, although this is reading between the lines of what's called the travaux préparatoires, the preparatory materials for the treaty itself, states were hesitant because they themselves had conducted a lot of cultural destruction in this country as well, with regard to destroying, and we'll get to that later on, with regard to indigenous peoples and things like that, and the impact of that. But the point of it is that it was hard for states to equate a cultural destruction with the physical destruction, so they left it in the idea that let's keep it on the physical/biological destruction as understood within the Genocide Convention. Okay. Now there's also a broad approach towards genocide. And that actually stems from the origin of the term itself. The origin is coined by Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish lawyer from Hungary, I believe. He actually was heavily influenced as well by the Armenian genocide, by the Young Turks in the late teens, early 20s, post-World War I, basically. And it bothered him a lot. And then he carried it through, and then through World War II. But the point of it is, if you think about the term genocide, it's C-Day, right? C-I-D-E. When you make a decision, you are deciding, right? You're removing everything else and focusing on one thing. So genocide is removing the genus, removing a particular group of people. That was just so you understand what the idea of genocide, where it comes from. For Raphael Lemkin, he actually desired he understood genocide in a very broad manner, in a very broad approach. He looked at it actually as the cultural destruction of a group. He looked at it holistically, and let's look at all these elements of what's happening in order to allow for greater protection to be accorded to groups of different people who are being attacked. But the interesting thing about the broad approach, if you will, is that the severity shifts. That it's not just a physical destruction, but it's threatening a group. And that gets a bit murky if you really think about it on a legal basis. If you're just threatening a group with potential destruction versus the actual physical destruction. And you see what I'm getting at is with the broad approach is not that it's bad or good, but the broad approach is really moving away from a solely physical approach, physical destruction as understood in genocide. And then over time, certainly post-Cold War, moves to incorporate ideas like femicide, ethnocide, today climate change, ecocide. There are attempts to incorporate those concepts, those notions, and these are just to name but a few, probably about 20 of them I can mention if you want, those notions to fold into aspects of committing genocide. And there has been attempts to also incorporate, although this is difficult, mass displacement of people. Attempts at displacement of people through mass killings. But that's now the impact of the broad approach. The impact of the broad approach is that you're veering away from an objective concept, actus reus. You're veering away from an objective notion of intent, and you're focusing on the violent actions which are undertaken, which is not necessarily bad or good, but it's important to be aware of what that does to the standard itself. And you're trying to fold in other concepts, like, for example, ethnic cleansing and things like that, which is not a bad thing, but it does lead to a weakening of the standard. Because what you're doing is that you're removing the grave severity, the extreme aspect of genocide. I have to say, I'm talking about genocide. Clearly, if you're engaged in ethnic killings and mass displacement, you could make the argument that maybe you're dealing with a war crime. But that's not genocide. And I say that because genocide is very severe. And if you try to overly broaden the term, you're actually weakening the severity of the actions that are undertaken by states, such that you will get claims that everything is considered genocide. Now, again, just to jump back into realpolitik, if you start to go overly broad, ecocide, ethicide, femicide is considered genocide, states are going to push back, and they're going to start ignoring the standard, because they're not going to want to be called that they're accused of committing genocide. It's an extremely severe action. And if you do that, you could be sitting in a Hague jail for a long time, assuming you abide by the International Criminal Court. And I can tell you right now, if you start doing that, what will happen, and has happened already on a certain level, just to be frank, is you'll ignore standards. The standards will be ignored by states. States are not stupid. And people aren't either. If you make an onerous law, people will start disobeying it. If you take something like genocide and you try to over-amplify it, it will be ignored. And states will not rely on it. In fact, I read a commentator wrote about, with regard to the post-October 7th, the speed and fury, I'm just quoting now, with which the genocide accusations exploded after the Hamas massacre of October 7, 2023, were unusual in the annals of lawfare. And I can tell you, as somebody who does follow these things in international law, international humanitarian law, lawfare, nobody has ever made that accusation of genocide within a month. I mean, literally a month and a half. I was reading Justice Shaol, he's an Irish professor, wrote a book on genocide, was accusing Israel of genocide. It's never happened before. It's an incredible thing, but I actually was a bit disheartened by the whole thing, because I feel like it really tore at the very foundation of what we try to establish within the human rights context, within the international law context, within the notion of prohibiting genocide where it really needs to be prohibited. But this is not a discussion about Israel-Gaza. I'm happy to engage that in the questions. What I do want to think about, however, is let's think about what Lakin was getting at. And I want to go there because that's, in a way, that's where arguably it's been morphing towards. And that is to think about the concept, the idea of cultural genocide. And I'm going there because, that's part of my field, which is cultural heritage protection, so I know about that. But also because what has been happening, I would say, since the 70s, 1970s that is an elaboration of the rights of indigenous peoples. And that's a good, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, that's a good thing, but when you focus on the rights of indigenous peoples in the human rights context, what you're getting at is, you're talking about the cultural structures of a particular group that provides this group, such as indigenous peoples, with an understanding of their collective and community identity. When you talk about indigenous people's rights, you're getting at the crux of their existence. The connection between cultural genocide and indigenous people's rights is quite stark. And referring to indigenous people's rights, not as cultural genocide, but just indigenous people's rights, referring to their cultural heritage and their understanding of themselves, because if you compare that to, for example, genocide, as I presented it, it's not necessarily physical or biological. It can be, but it's beyond that with regard to indigenous peoples. Whereas you're not just trying to, where indigenous peoples, you're trying to physically eviscerate a culture. You're trying to remove them from their very identity. In fact, in a way, that's why I referenced Raphael Lemkin, because that was his original intention with regard to genocide. He envisioned what we would call today, to give him credit, he envisioned in 1945, probably, he started writing about this in the early 40s actually, what we would call today cultural genocide. That's what he wanted. That's what he wanted in the convention itself. Not just physical, but it destroying the very essential way of life of a particular group. And I should say, there's been some movement towards aspects of cultural genocide, for example, in the International Criminal Court, which is not the International Court of Justice, right? We're good on that. You could talk to me about that afterward. For example, a recent case from, I think it was about four or 5 years ago, with regard to the intentional destruction of 9 mausoleums and a mosque in Timbuktu. And it was an interesting case because in the end they didn't try the case because they just pled out. He just pleaded out and said, yes, I intentionally destroyed these mausoleums in a mosque, and as a result he's sitting in a Hague jail, right? But the charges against that particular individual were actually that you committed cultural genocide. Or I should actually clarify that you committed genocide that also included factors that were going against the cultural existence of a particular group. Sorry, I should really just be clear about that, okay? And I should also mention, early drafts of the Genocide Convention itself actually included references to cultural genocide. Okay. Now, I'm going to go a little bit quicker. I think I'm okay for time. I have about 10 minutes. Okay, so I might take more. Hey, it's the inaugural lecture, so I get to play around. All right, thanks. Cultural genocide is getting towards the idea of a cultural identity, the heritage of a particular group. Heritage is inextricably linked to the survival of a group. And this is something that I've always noticed and that I plan on writing about, just so you know, for the future in cultural heritage protection. I always found it fascinating because you have cultural heritage protection. If you look at it in the international legal context, international human rights context, it's very bizarre because it's always said as, oh my gosh, heritage, that's seminal. Oh my gosh, culture, you need that to exist. Oh my gosh, for that group to really be a group, that is their base, that's their foundation. And yet when we come to protect it, it always falls apart. It's very, very hard to protect, actually. Almost I wouldn't say impossible, but that's partially why, for example, in the cultural heritage protection context, we've morphed over into protecting not just tangible property, but actually intangible property. Language, for example, languages that are being lost are now perceived as part of cultural heritage protection. The World Heritage Convention has moved beyond just protecting monuments or buildings to also incorporate landscapes and just even rock formations and stuff like that. So there is kind of a shift to try to adopt a larger, broader understanding of cultural heritage, which also can morph into cultural genocide protection as well, arguably. Now the problem with that, of course, is, and I want you to be aware of this, is that once we morph over into a, hey, let's look at cultural heritage and try to protect it, well, guess who's going to define what cultural heritage is? It's not going to necessarily be the indigenous groups who might need protection or the minority groups who might need protection. But it'll be the majority voices. It'll be the states themselves that will go ahead and say what kind of protection they'll, and it'll be in line with their interests. And I've seen this in cultural heritage protection, as Professor Graysburn mentioned, the book on Jerusalem and its holy sites. What is the focus? What do you consider a holy site? What do you consider cultural heritage for if you're a Jewish population versus an Arab population, and Christian, Muslim, et cetera, you can imagine. And then it gets into even more sects that are found in Jerusalem. What I'm trying to say is that you're going to have an identification and interpretation of cultural heritage that reflects is pursuant to the political perception, desired political perception of the time. And in fact, in a way, that is the crux of the misuse of the current term of genocide, is that it's pursuant to someone else's narrative as they see the facts or as they see the events unfolding that are not always the case, I hate to say it. Okay, that I could leave aside for now. The relevance of this to this article that I was talking about, this is all intro stuff, but I'll go quick now, is that cultural heritage, and in a way cultural genocide, relates to memory. It relates to who we are. It relates to our identity. And if you're an indigenous person, you would recognize that right away. If there are Jews in the audience, you probably recognize that right away. I'll amplify that about the Jewish approach to memory. But memory transforms how, as a group, we can approach an extreme occurrence like genocide. It impacts how we perceive that atrocity. It defines how we approach an understanding of, let's say, memorializing or recognizing what happened, or looking at a wall of survivors and understanding what that means for particular people. Now, memory, of course, is transitory, right? It's very difficult. It's not reliable always. It's haunted by forgetting. How many people remember what they did 2 hours ago, right? It's hard, but it's in our brain somewhere. So remember, it's thinking about what memory is, but memory cannot be stored in monuments, and no offense to the museum or in museums. We could try, but that will change and shift as well. I was thinking about that. Well, I was going to give an example, but we don't have time. But the memory of the past and memory of atrocities and the past atrocities is always subject to different interpretations, right? And that's the danger in a way as well, right? Something we have to be aware of, that memories. And finally, and this is important, memory, and this is 2 slides I'm going to skip over, but memory is not a substitute for justice. But what's interesting is that justice relies on memory in order to engage in a justice approach, right? Could you please tell us what happened? I need eyewitness testimony. I need to have that memory in order to understand how to pursue justice in this particular moment. I wasn't looking at you, sorry, I didn't mean to alarm you. But the point of it is that there's this weird kind of relationship between memory that goes towards what we're trying to get at when we think about, for example, Holocaust memory. So, and I'll take 5 to 7 more minutes, is that memory shapes, obviously, our conception. Especially when we link it with literature, with ideology, with practice, it provides, in a way, an eternal contemporaneity. It's always there if we instill it and integrate it into what we do. Memory does not necessarily relate to, let's say, time or facts, but to an aspect that evokes something for you. I'm going to be quite frank, I'm now a Holocaust scholar. I've never been to Poland. I've been to concentration camps in other places, but not in Auschwitz, for example. But the Holocaust has resonance for me for a whole bunch of reasons, for obvious reasons probably. A feeling within ourselves becomes a form of, and this is important, ongoing reactualization. We engage in memory to reactualize something that was seminal, that was an atrocity, or that was an event that impacted us. Just to skip a couple of slides here, and that's why I was referencing indigenous peoples, for example, and memory. For indigenous peoples, what's interesting is that memory is outside time and space. For indigenous peoples, it's not linear or expansive. It's something that allows for a group of people to connect their past with their present and move to the future. It's quite an interesting concept if you really think about it. Traditions, practices, rituals, performances, for example, that's happening now. It's certainly happening with indigenous people. It's a deep engagement with your past and activates the present as well. It's in a way a different ontology of memory, if you will, not to get too crazy on us here. Jewish memory. What's the principal commandment that we have as Jews with regard to memory? Zachot Yatziat Mitzrayim. Remember leaving Egypt. Does anybody know the date that we left Egypt, by the way? I probably could get it for you if we really thought about it. If you really want to talk. But that doesn't matter to a Jewish memory. The Jewish memory is based on, similar to indigenous peoples, believe it or not, is remembering, evoking the past. It's a way of creating unity within the group itself. The events in the Jewish calendar, the holidays that we might have, are striving to experience what happened to our forefathers and to actually be there. That's the edict in the Pesach Seder, in the Passover Seder, is you should see yourself as if you're leaving. You should actualize what happened. That was an event in your memory that's embedded that you, for generations, the Jews have been doing. For example, to allow that to happen. I would go into Shabbat as well, but I don't want to get too much on. Now, memory in the Holocaust, because this is what you all came here to hear. So, you know, from my research that I've been doing thus far with regard to the Holocaust is, let's avoid Holocaust tropes, right? That's the current language that's used among Holocaust scholars. Holocaust is not necessarily unique. We shouldn't hierarchize suffering. You're one person suffering and they're suffering. Oh, let's not compare it. There was 6 million and there was only 2 million. That's not the game that we're wont to play. And you know, as time goes on, Holocaust itself is used for manipulated in many ways, politicized in many ways. But the Holocaust can still be unique as captured and distilled in memory by people to whom it is important, to whom it is seminal, to whom it has an effect. And that's not to say is that memory is definitive, that no, we can never compare. The title of my chair is Comparative Genocide. I want to compare. I want to think about. But I am also going to allow for that memory of the Holocaust to define, to reactualize, to be part of my past, to be part of my present, and to look to my future as well. It's distinction of saying genocide equation versus genocide comparison. And genocide comparison allows for memory. And I could go into also how that is with cultural genocide and cultural heritage protection for indigenous groups. And I'll end with this, and I apologize for taking a little bit longer, and that is as follows. You know, this is, for me, I'll try not to break up because it's a very hard time, actually, today. It's a Yom HaZikaron. And we remember the fallen. And this is the strangest time. Yeah, it's like 6:45. I remember in Israel at this time, because the whole day you have very somber music being played, and everybody's very down, you know, chilled out, and you contemplate and you think. And then you get to the elation of Yom Ha'atzmaut and Independence Day, Chag Ha'atzmaut and Independence Day. And it's really quite elating, although sadly now hopefully everybody in Israel should be okay with the crazy fires and craziness that's going on there. And in a way that's what memory, Yom HaZikaron is a day of what? Of memory. I know the Israelis in the audience will roll their eyes when I say this, but the famous Yehuda Amichai poem. It's a beautiful poem. And he says, how do you stand at the tekes, at this memorial service for Yom HaZikaron? How do you stand? And he writes this beautiful poem. Do you stand straight and tall and proud? Or do you count, you know, just, as if you're really sad? Or do you close your eyes and think of the stars and think about what could be? Or do you keep them open as if you're a corpse, frozen, impacted? When do you stand, he says? Do you stand at a time of the day when your shadow is, the sun's right above you and your shadow is stuck in the ground? Or do you stand towards the end of the day when your shadow is really long and longing for not a past or not a future, but just there forever? He goes, just like God. That's what memory is. Memory is that shadow. Casting that shadow, recognizing that you are the casting of that shadow. I'm part of that memory. And that's what I'll be writing about and talking about in the during the course of the next couple of years, hopefully. Partly, also cultural genocide. Okay, now, the importance of memory for today's speakers is, I believe, I had the pleasure of inviting these colleagues. I got to know these two wonderful people to my immediate left over the past couple months, especially as the chair was being formed. And I believe that their talks will be partially about considering the impact of memory, historical retelling, retooling memory, recasting the past as memory fades, leading to the old tropes that might arise, sadly. Desire to recast the past in order to allow for us to be in the present. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to my really great friend and colleague, Chris Ayal Feinberg. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we want to change the slide, right?
Well, here's what... Can we hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm soft-spoken. It drives me crazy. So if anybody at any time is having trouble hearing me, please just be as obnoxious, wave your hands, let me know, and I'll try to eat this microphone. Leonard, here's what I think. I think we should make an executive decision here, and you and I should switch seats.
Oh, smart.
I am short, but even I might be blocking the view for some folks here, and that way I can control the slides too.
Great.
So give us just 30 seconds
Yeah,
here.
give me a second just to switch the...
Stand up for a few seconds.
I don't know how to... I don't know how to...
My feet are actually asleep, so I'm going to maybe dance a little bit as well.
David, do you know where the next slideshow is? It should be... this is a Mac. I'm sorry, I only know the... I'm not a Mac, it's a Windows, and I only know
Tough
the...
subject.
Oh, there we are. Oh, fine. Smart.
No, I'm okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Jackie. I wasn't sure how to play the game.
I appreciate you.
And I think this will be the clicker.
Okay, we can give it a shot.
Yeah. I'll go into that,
If
yeah,
you
for
could
sure.
just put it in, I just think that way.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's great.
All right, friends, let's do another 15 seconds stretch. Get ready for the next round. So first and foremost, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to everybody here, taking time out of your evening to listen, to learn, to engage. I'm excited to learn with you, to learn from you. I've been really looking forward to this evening, despite this being day number 9 of travel in a row, 4th city, same subject, unfortunately. But it's really important that we're here, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to engage with you. Title of the talk, hopefully you can read it even far in the back, Beyond Definitions, Harnessing Research to Combat Anti-Semitism and Hate. So I'm going to give you an outline here, as my colleague Dr. Hammer did as well. Here's what I'm trying to do today. We'll see if we get there. We're going to talk a little bit about defining anti-Semitism, and if you got the gist from the title, I think that this is not a particularly important topic, but we need to address it anyway. Then we're going to move into measures of anti-Semitism, something that is far more important and far more impactful to how we counter this prejudice. I'm going to give you some insight on critical new data on anti-Semitism. I'm really privileged to have access to more data on this subject than very likely anybody else in the world. So it's a special opportunity for me to share these insights with the community that cares so deeply about this subject. Then I'm going to go into a little bit of my own work and the work of some of my colleagues and how we're employing survey experiments to really drive out causality, the idea of the factors that are really driving some of the anti-Semitism that we've seen both historically and today. But first and foremost, I want to apologize. I want to apologize because you might hear it in my voice throughout this talk. Maybe you can see it with my body motions, but I'm angry. Dr. Hammer took me on an amazing hike this morning, and we talked about partnerships through the saguaros, and then I think I'm up to 12 tacos already today. So I should be okay. I should be really, really good, actually. but I'm not. I'm angry. And I've been angry for a very long time. And the reason I'm angry is because I'm looking out at a community that's in despair. And they've been in despair now for well over 18 months. And there's a difference between being angry and being in despair. Any psychologists in the room? Psychiatrists? Right? Some wannabes, some people that have read Freud at least once or twice, right? There is a difference between being angry and being in despair. And the good news, folks, is that being angry can be, and being like possessing anger can be constructive. Being in despair is usually not, and leaves one unable to be constructive. So I want to turn your despair into anger. Join me in anger here so we can work towards real meaningful solutions in this space. So let's start with a video, because who doesn't love videos?
Sometimes I imagine what I write today for my dear friend Martin. I remind people that all hate thrives on one thing: silence. The people who will change the nation are those who speak out, who refuse to be bystanders, who raise their voices against injustice. When we stand up to silence, we stand up to all hate.
Anybody see this advertisement before? I see a few hands up. It was an advertisement that was purchased for the Super Bowl, actually, several years ago. Big fanfare. $7 million ad purchase, right? This is not about resources, folks. Who thinks this is a good advertisement? Raise your hand if you think it's good, then we'll do mediocre, and then we'll do bad. So we'll do a little flash poll here. Who thinks this was a good advertisement? Don't be scared. Who thinks it was mediocre? Okay, who thinks it was bad? A few folks think it was bad. So I have some news to report. My colleagues and I, Joshua Calla at Yale University, David Brookman at UC Berkeley, did a meta-analysis of a variety of these commercials, 34 dependent variables, 34 different ways we can measure anti-Semitism and how it manifests. This moved the needle positively for 0 of those measures. 0. $7 million ad purchase moved it for 0. In fact, in some cases, and for some communities of particular importance, it had what we call a backlash effect. So not only did we spend $7 million on it, well, not we, but not only did someone spend $7 million on an advertisement aimed at reducing anti-Semitism, they might have made it a little bit worse.
That's right.
Now, I want to show you another video, because we have to be a little bit optimistic here.
Nothing. Just get in the car. Let's go.
Who did that?
Come on. Right now. In. Get in. Right now. Let's go.
Did you paint it or something?
Move it. Seatbelt on. Right now. Put your seatbelt on.
Right, we don't even need to do the flash poll. This is a good advertisement. In fact, it's an excellent advertisement. Moved the needle on 12 of the 34 that we were interested in. That's a hard thing to do in advertisement, by the way. Very, very successful, and interestingly, successful for groups that are of particular importance when we're trying to counter anti-Semitism. Men. Anti-Semitism, like other forms of prejudice, has a gendered component. Males, ceteris paribus, see, I'm using Latin too, are more likely to have higher levels of anti-Semitic trope alignment, right? So the fact that this pings specifically strongly for males is good. Lower socioeconomic status. Also, on average, people that tend to have slightly higher levels of anti-Semitic trope alignment. And it moves the needle in really important ways. In fact, one might argue the most important way. It moves the needle significantly in that people recognize anti-Semitism is something that's important. It's not exaggerated, it's not trivialized, and it prompts them to take action, and it gives you a narrative that shows you that you can take action as an individual. It gives people a sense of agency, that they can make a difference. So we're going to go back and forth, I think, throughout. You'll see me kind of give you something optimistic, and then we'll go right back into a lot of negativity. That's just the nature of the subject. Defining anti-Semitism. Anybody familiar with the many debates, fanfare, resources, tremendous amount of hours and dollars we've spent trying to define anti-Semitism? Even with anti-Semitism, right, for a long time, we couldn't figure out how to spell it. Right, we call those the hyphen wars. And now they're back, by the way. I'm here to tell you we have a real problem with our focus on defining anti-Semitism, and I want us to start off with an alternative. So not only do I like tacos, I also like beer. I will give you a free beer if you can tell me this image on the left. What city here in the United States?
It's in Arizona.
No, I wish it was in Arizona. It kind of looks like Arizona, doesn't it?
Utah. Yeah.
Well, I know everybody would like a free beer, but it's Garden City, Idaho.
Idaho?
Now, anybody familiar with Garden City, Idaho?
The woman got rid of the Nazis by getting all their land and money.
That's not the story I'm telling today. So, like I said in the onset, I'm super excited to learn from you and with you.
Was it the comment in the window that all the townspeople?
No, that's in Montana. No, I won't belabor this anymore, guys. Garden City, Idaho, home to Patrick Little, a neo-Nazi city council candidate who ran on the platform of the violent deportation of Jews. How many Jews are there in Garden City, Idaho?
0.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, not a lot. Okay? I don't think there's a shul within 50 miles of Garden City, Idaho. Yet, anti-Semitism playing a humongous role in the local politics of Garden City, Idaho. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Patrick Little was also a Senate candidate. In the open primary in California in 2018, that Dianne Feinstein ended up winning, he ran along with 20 other candidates in that open primary to see who would be the top two that would end up going in the general for that Senate seat. Patrick Little got 80,000 votes, including 3.5% of the vote in Orange County. You can't wash that away and say people just didn't know who he was. There were 20 other candidates in this election. Anti-Semitism is a real problem. Now, I'm definitely not offering a free beer for those of you who recognize where the location is on the right. That is, of course, Columbia University, been in the news quite a lot. New York City, home to one of, depending on how you define it, perhaps the largest concentration of Jews in an urban space in the entire world. And certainly we have seen an explosion of anti-Semitism in New York City and across urban areas where Jews are a major population as well. Now here we are. These are the three main definitions of anti-Semitism. They're the ones that get all the fanfare, both in academia and otherwise. It's the IRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. This is the one that enjoys the most support from the Jewish community, from the government, from institutions. Underneath, you have the nexus definition, aimed at challenging some of the examples that were put in place as part of the IRA definition, and then the Jerusalem Declaration, or the JDA, at the bottom. I'm not going to bother reading you these definitions because they're boring. And because when you read these definitions, frankly, there are elements of some that are good and elements of some that aren't so good. And we could probably come up with a slightly better definition if we hybridize this a little bit. But people are not upset about the definition. What they're upset about is the examples. And specifically, they're upset about when criticism of Israel, or criticism of Zionism, or being anti-Israel or anti-Zionism, crosses the line into anti-Semitism. The core portion of the debate that we're really having over these definitions is about that. Now, any baseball fans in the room? Any Tucson Swallow fans? Right, usually I'm in bigger cities and there's a real baseball team. So, if you are a baseball fan, you know the gentleman on the right, Angel Hernandez, is the worst umpire in history of baseball. He's awful. I just showed you one of many games that he lost the Philadelphia Phillies, my team, by his calls, right? But this is important because what the empirics show here is that even on one of his worst days, Angel Hernandez gets it right nearly 90% of the time. That is true as it relates to definitions of anti-Semitism as well. We're fighting over 10%, not 90%. And because we've given so much attention to this 10%, what have we done? We've made it easy to legitimize denial of anti-Semitism. We've suggested then that there isn't this community consensus of what anti-Semitism is and how it manifests. And the empirics consistently show that the community understands what is anti-Semitism and how it feels and how it manifests. What it then does is it allows those that represent views not reflective of the community, broadly speaking, it tokenizes them. It rewards them. It suggests that they represent a much larger piece of the pie than they actually do. And especially in this space, I want to leave this line here. We'll address it maybe in the Q&A if you'd like, but it's so powerful, it's so foundational, I wanted to leave it. Prior to 1945, anti-Semitism was all about determining who was Jewish. After 1945, it was all about determining who's an anti-Semite. It's from Lisa Silverman, who's a sociologist at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I'm a political scientist, but this is one of the rare good things sociologists have done. So let's move into measures here, right? So as a scholar of anti-Semitism, how do I think about anti-Semitism? How do others think about anti-Semitism when they're crafting research aimed at figuring out meaningful, powerful, impactful knowledge that can affect how we develop interventions to reduce anti-Semitism? Oftentimes, we talk about events, right? You might have seen the ADL recently release its report card showing yet again we're at record highs. How many years in a row are we going to be at a new high? We can look at acts of terror, hate crimes, bias incidents, acts of discrimination. Of course, because age also plays a component in anti-Semitism. Interestingly, right, as we talked about being male, being associated with higher levels of anti-Semitism, being younger makes one more likely to have higher levels of anti-Semitic trope alignment. And this is important for us as scholars because it's different, right? Most other forms of prejudice, the exact opposite materializes. Increased age, increased prejudice, which means that there's something unique, there's something divergent about anti-Semitism. Let's look at, I want to say one thing about social media for a second. I think it's important. You see a lot of data out there that looks at the frequency and the normalization, therefore, of anti-Semitism occurring on certain platforms. But the most interesting research is one that identifies double standards, right? Because as a community, the most common way we experience anti-Semitism in the contemporary times we live in is through at least a feeling of double standard. So the most interesting work actually looks at how quickly anti-Semitic content and rhetoric is dropped, how quickly it's reported, the frequency of its reporting versus other forms of prejudice. This is far more insightful to identifying that double standard and then identifying that to platforms, which makes it much harder for them to continue on with the status quo. So I just want to drop that there. Policy here. Unfortunately, it is 2025, and we still see institutions that are employing, utilizing, engaging in discrimination of the Jewish community. We've frequently heard about this on college campuses, right? Oftentimes manifesting through Title VI violations, but also, and I think more interestingly and potentially more legally impactful, but I'll leave that to the legal scholars, are Title VII violations as well. Network analysis, we're doing a lot of work to understand how rhetoric spreads. And the one we do most commonly, and I think is most important in terms of identifying the knowledge that we need to know about who to target with our interventions. Our attitudes and beliefs, the surveys that we conduct. AJC recently conducted a survey, again, showing record levels of anti-Semitism and experienced anti-Semitism amongst the Jewish population. I'm going to give you a brief summary here. We're not going to go through all of these, but some that I think are really important. 60% of Americans at least probably agree that much of our lives are controlled by plots hatched in secrecy. Now, you might say that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. There is no stronger corollary. There is no stronger corollary to anti-Semitic attitudes, beliefs, and trope alignment than conspiracy thinking. Massive, massive difference in anti-Semitic attitudes between those that are in this category and those that are not. 51% of Americans at least probably agree that Jews are more loyal to Israel than they are the United States. I don't know who's good at math here, but that's a majority. The first time in history we've seen it cross that threshold. We've been measuring this word for word since 1964. A few other things I'll note here, some that are particularly terrifying. 1 in 5 Americans at least probably agree that Jews are responsible for most of the world's wars.
Yep.
1 in 5, folks. I want to take us back from the brink, give you that one little bit of positive, and then we'll go right back into the negative again, right? We polled 10 of the largest diaspora countries recently, and we found that Americans were the best at identifying online hate and that had the highest frequency of reporting it. Now, we're still talking about less than a third of people who identify anti-Semitic hate going and reporting it to those platforms, but it's still better than most. Another thing I need to address here, because what we do all the time is we make anti-Semitism about ideology, right? Anti-Semitism is about what the other party is doing, what the other side is doing. It's progressive, it's conservative, it's far left, it's far right. The data is unequivocal. Some of the largest increases in anti-Semitic trope alignment have occurred in those that identify in the ideological center. Horseshoe theory be damned. As anti-Semitism has become more salient, right, those that are the most likely to be politically disengaged and apathetic and unrepresented by either party that has weaponized anti-Semitism are those that are seeing the largest increases of anti-Semitism. So unfortunately, with this slide here, we are looking at just the tip of the iceberg of factors that help to explain variation in reported anti-Semitism. We know this from a lot of rigorous empirical studies over the last 5 years, identifying these factors. Important for me to note as a social scientist, because oftentimes we forget, a single factor rarely, if ever, explains attitude formation and certainly behavior. But all of these factors have importance in explaining variation in anti-Semitic trope alignment. Friends and family who dislike Jews, right? The normalization of anti-Semitism. Want me to speed it up?
No, you.
Subscription, just give me the boot, right? Subscription to conspiracy. This is an important one because we talk about unpredictability in our political environment. It's not unpredictability that explains heightened levels of anti-Semitism. It's this notion of uncontrollability, lack of agency, inability to change one's future or the future of the country, a feeling of hopelessness that also then makes conspiracy more enticing. Education is one I want to mention in part because, again, it's an area of divergence from other forms of prejudice. Right? In other forms of prejudice, we look to education as a broad solution to reduce prejudice. This is not the case as it relates at least to credentialing and its impact on anti-Semitism. If you have not graduated high school, you tend to have higher levels of anti-Semitism versus those that do. But after the bachelor's degree, anti-Semitic trope alignment goes up. If you have a terminal degree, like those of us here, goes up meaningfully, right? Quite a lot. Religion, ideology, personality characteristics, race, ethnicity, competing and collective victimhood, of course, positions on Israel and Zionism. Specifically, right, anti-Semitism is something that we tend to feel is a late, I'm seeing people in the back there, I'm trying to engage with you too. Hi, howdy. Anti-Semitism is something that we feel in general is a latent phenomenon. So oftentimes we need certain stimulus or stimuli, right, in society to see this elevation of anti-Semitism. We, for example, definitely saw that with 10/7. Just going to go briefly here into age. Those that think that age is an important driver of anti-Semitism would be right. What's critical here is that it's how we measure age, right? When we think about small increments of age, we don't really capture any sort of meaningful difference. When we use certain cut points like those that are 30 or less or those that are 31 and over, see small distinctions, but it's not critical. What is critical is when you look at generations. Specifically Gen Z, which everybody assumes has the highest levels, and they do as it relates to anti-Israel anti-Semitism, but not conspiratorial anti-Semitism. That belongs to our millennial cohort. Here's what I want to show with this. We're looking at two tropes here. 5 minutes, perfect. Jews have too much power in the United States today, and Jews do not share my values. I was working for the Center for Anti-Semitism Research, and luckily we had the resources to run a flash survey immediately following 10/7. We're talking days, when the news coverage was still slightly sympathetic. What we see here, right, you see this difference in age cohort, as I mentioned, but then we ran it 3 months later. The coverage has changed. Now when you look, you'll see meaningful increases across almost all age categories, God bless you. But it's doubled or tripled in some cases for millennials and Gen Z. We did this also by looking at differences in anti-Israel policy preferences. Again, you can see a clear difference in support across generations. But what we realized here is that, hold on a second, we're focusing so much on this debate over Israel and Zionism. Do people actually know what Zionism is? So we did a survey. We found that 50% of Americans have never even heard the term Zionism. They didn't know how to define it. They never even heard the term until we brought it up to them. Then we polled how many people felt confident in determining what Zionism was and defining it. Then you had about 50% of that initial 50%. So now we're at 25%. Then we gave them a series of options of how to define them, and there was only one right answer. And again, 50% were able to get this correctly. So we're looking at a very small proportion of the population that can actually understand what Zionism is. Fascinatingly, those that do know what Zionism is, given that small proportion, are less anti-Semitic and are more strongly in favor of certain policies that support Israel. And I'm going to close with this slide. There's a lot more to discuss, but we'll end here with this survey experiment because it gives you a good example of what we can do to begin to impact how we counter anti-Semitism. We thought, you know what's really interesting? If nobody knows what Zionism is, maybe we can move the needle by helping to frame Zionism in a certain way. So we gave a very boilerplate definition of what Zionism was, but then what we did is we provided different treatments, different framing vignettes with that definition. So we had a group that received no framing vignette. We had one that received a historical and religious vignette, one with a security and a democracy vignette, one that focused on the possibility of a double standard, specifically within human rights, one that focused on technology, one that focused on safety from persecution. Here's what we found. Only the historic and religious framing had meaningful value in moving the needle. It increased the likelihood that respondents would support military aid for Israel. It decreased the likelihood that they would support certain policies for BDS. Interestingly enough, though, it didn't have a major impact on anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic troping. Few quick takeaways here, and then I'll hand it over to my amazing colleague. One, please stop talking about technology and the cherry tomato. It doesn't move the needle. It doesn't help. Second major takeaway is that this is a demonstration that messaging is important. Messaging does work, and we've invested little to nothing in this space for decades. We need to reinvest our resources into research. We need to credentialize an expertise in anti-Semitism. We need to demand from the organizations that are spending your hard-earned dollars to reduce anti-Semitism certain accountability and assessment of the programs that they're doing. Demonstrate to us that what you're doing works. And support people like us here that are doing the real research, the impactful research that are moving the needle. No more $7 million ad buys for commercials that don't work. I'll turn this over to my amazing colleague, Devin. Thank you.
I got it, Devin? Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's great. Oh, yes. Sorry, it's all good. No worries. That was really great, man. Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate you too. You're awesome.
Thank you, Jackie. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. I would first want to start off before I get into the talk, just to say thank you for being here tonight. I consider this a part of my extended family. I'm from South Carolina, and I'll tell you, it's been such amazing hospitality since I've been here. Had a chance to meet Lori and get a chance to really understand the enduring spirit of this space, and also to be celebrated with some amazing people in the audience. So again, thank you all so much. And also, Leonard, thank you for reaching out to me on the way coming back from the UK and heading to Israel. So thank you. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about a really fascinating project that really ties in nicely into what Ayal was talking about in terms of working understanding of anti-Semitism, but really thinking about how do we look at putting our understandings, our practices into work. To give you a little context about historically Black colleges and universities, we have about 103 total, and enrollment roughly right at about 300,000 students. And so what you'll find is it's pale in comparison to other universities, but it gives us a very important space to start thinking about how do we look at anti-Semitism, how do we think about otherness, how do we think about combating forms of hate in all of its capacity. So one of the projects I've been really fortunate to work on through the partnership with the Academic Engagement Network is working with historically Black colleges and universities, specifically college administrators, as well as presidents and students. Students in what we refer to as our first year programs. In some cases, they would be considered sophomore experience. But this is a population of students that most likely are entering on college campuses for the first time. And we thought that in crafting this particular project, we wanted to know, one, how students understand their definitions of what they understood about anti-Semitism and Zionism, but also how do they understand their own engagement with hate. A little bit of background about who I am. Part of my previous work, I had the privilege of working at the University of South Carolina with our Anne Frank Center and traveling and working with our traveling exhibit. And one of the things that we always found was we would get calls to come out to colleges and universities after there was an anti-Semitic event that happened on the campus. Mm-hmm. And we would be curious about figuring out, well, why haven't we seen policies and procedures and systems in place to really address these events? It's always we are reacting. And it led me to start thinking about how do we create a system in colleges and universities, working specifically with historically Black colleges, to work across the aisle with universities to help create systems and protocols to help support conversations about otherness on the college campus, but also to let them understand about identity. We didn't want to just do what I refer to as just very nice work. We really wanted to complicate the experience. We were fortunate to work with 3 historically Black colleges and universities, and just recently received an announcement that we will be expanding our project throughout the Carolinas, as well as through Georgia and some other areas in Alabama. This is a multi-year grant that targets first year and sophomore students and taking them through the understandings of not only convergence and divergence between Jewish and African American communities, but also understanding how these relationships can share some understanding about our own experiences. Now, there's not a conversation about comparing moments in history. That's not what this project is designed to do. The project is really designed to see how students are really engaging with their own identity on a college campus. But as an extension of that, working across campuses to create relationships with faculty and staff, teaching on areas of anti-Semitism, Zionism, combating hate on college campuses. One course looked at the life of Anne Frank and Emmett Till and otherness, and how do we develop tools to help educate students on these relationships. The universities that we were privileged to work with in the first year of this grant was with South Carolina State University, as well as Denmark Tech and Voorhees University. So each program that we worked with ended up being roughly about right under 500 students total. And a part of that project allowed us not only to work with first-year students, but work with the college administrators. So when I say college administrators, student affairs, as well as provosts and presidents. What we were fascinated about is just the amount of support that we had at that level going into the conversation. So it wasn't that I was coming in from the University of South Carolina and working with these particular students. We all had buy-in to the experience because every student on a college campus go through some form of orientation. That orientation could be a series of courses. Most of those courses, what we find, a lot of them deal with identity and belonging, right? Feeling safe. But when we started to look at the policies and the manuals, the student handbook, what we found was there were no conversations about student understanding of anti-Semitism and racism and otherness. It was almost as if students, if they got in trouble, if there was an event on the college campus, there was just a referral either to the dean's office and there was some punitive outcome, and then that was it. But there was no education about, well, how is it that and why are you feeling the way that you're feeling? Could you tell me a little bit more about why you're feeling this way? Why did you write this particular issue? How did you feel this particular way? What we found from working with these 3 universities was that instructors had a general sense of anti-Semitism and kind of very general in terms of the working definition that they had. Students had no knowledge of what the term meant. So when I say that, if I ask students, how did you feel about the current climate around anti-Semitism, more specifically thinking about some of the recent events on college campuses, or even thinking about the conflict that has touched so many of us, how do you navigate that experience? Students didn't even feel comfortable to really communicate what that meant to them. And part of that was when they thought about their own experience on a college campus, they thought about it from what identity meant to them, but not even understanding the parallels between Jewish and African American communities, more specifically some of the relationships that evolved and helped shape some of the conversation that we're now having. And so what we found is we had to really go back and talk a little bit about some of the alliances that we saw historically between these communities as a baseline for students to understand why these relationships were so important. The process of this project was not only educating them about this relationship, but how do we create a cohort of student ambassadors, students that would be working specifically with colleges across the Carolinas and across different states to be ambassadors that understand what anti-Semitism is, right? How do we create incident response teams on college campuses, and not incident response teams as a reactive approach, but how can we work with different universities to put in policies and procedures in the student handbook as well as educational seminars about these particular issues? And how do we do this in a very systemic way across not only these universities, but other universities as well? And this would happen normally through new student programming, but also working with the faculty members in those particular courses, just to make sure that they had the training about this project, about anti-Semitism, Zionism, etc. So it wasn't that we came in as researchers and laid out all this content. We created what we refer to as a train-the-trainer approach, and that way they had that knowledge that they could share with other cohorts in the following semesters. So a little bit about the first phase of the project. We had roughly about 280 students, and some of the components that we worked with. We kind of talked about what identity-based coalition building looked like for a college student. We also worked with what we refer to as our student government associations. They may have different terms on other college campuses, but really the student leaders that are one of the most important key pieces of relationship building on a college campus. As a former vice president of student affairs, I can tell you that if you don't set that relationship with your students and they don't have that level of engagement with you, then they're not going to come talk to you at all, right? And my goal was to make sure that throughout the relationships that I had with other college administrators, to do this identity building workshop experiences so that they themselves can take this work back to their campuses, but also to make sure that they have a general understanding of the importance of building relationships with their college campuses as well. I can tell you that there was some very unique things that came out from this survey, is that we have a lot of work to do in terms of building not only rapport within historically black colleges and universities and other colleges, but we have to begin to think about it from the importance of now. And the reason that we wanted to do this project was to get students to start thinking about how identity looks for you, but then also who are some of the key people in the decision-making process, who's not included in the conversation. At the moment when there's a anti-Semitic event on a college campus, B, a form of injustice, what toolkit can we work with you to develop so that way we can decrease these issues on college campuses? When I am traveling to other universities and I'm coming to talk about these particular issues, it's always a reaction. It's always something that bothers me greatly, because I think that this is a moment in history where when we think about resources collectively, the issues that we're dealing with is not a Devin issue, a Ayal issue, or a Leonard issue, right? It's an issue of humanity. And I think we have to situate our experiences, our resources, our ways of knowing, and really reach collectively to help build a bridge that can help us reimagine the type of society that we really want to leave. And I think that requires us to not look at it as a one-off issue, but as a collective agency and think about what that looks like. Another finding that came from this was administrators realized that we need to have more culturally responsive campuses. And the beautiful thing about historically black colleges and universities, there's a very deep sense of belonging and ownership within that community. However, that oftentimes is siloed, meaning that that community often doesn't see how it can benefit from other relationships. But then when students started to understand about the relationship between Jewish and African American communities, more specifically the roles of HBCUs in educating Jewish scholars when no other institution would accept, students start to get an affinity of why it's important to really think outside of things that they're most likely accustomed to. Some of the lessons I learned from this project was that we need more students and student ambassadors. So we are expanding kind of our initial cohort. Ideally, we wanted to have a representation of 3 cohorts of student ambassadors from Benedict, South Carolina State, and Allen. Our goal is within South Carolina is to also work to make sure that of the 6 HBCUs that we continue our conversation on the college campus, and also make sure that we work across South Carolina, North Carolina, and et cetera about this. One of the toolkits that we will be delivering will be a toolkit that looks at how do you address anti-Semitism on a college campus, what are some of the tools and resources you need to help to create proactive systems inside of the universities, how do you engage the current student body in terms of student leaders to help, what does social media and crisis response teams look like, who's representative of those teams. Typically we see that it's just cabinet level individuals, and they implement the policy and hope the campus responds. We're advocating for more student involvement. We're also advocating for more educational seminars for students that can really help shape some of these particular conversations. And then the last thing we're really encouraging is making sure that students have a sustainability model. So this is not just a 1-year project, it's a 3-year project. The goal is that it would go into eventually into a 6.5-year project where we will be working throughout the Carolinas and other places to really help engage our college administrators as well as our students about the importance of understanding these issues on the college campus as well. I look forward to hearing from you any questions and comments you have about the project, any areas for clarity. I'm more happy to discuss that more. Thank you all.
Amazing.